Zektaros stared at the assignment pad in his four-fingered hands. The blue light from the screen reflected off his large, dark eyes as he read the orders for the third time. Military observation duty. Standard protocol. Nothing unusual about it, except for one small detail that made his throat sacs flutter with mild annoyance. Humans. The Velthari had been the galaxy's official military observers for over 2,000 years. Their perfect memory and analytical minds made them ideal for documenting battles and studying military tactics. Every major conflict in the known galaxy had a Velthari observer recording every detail. It was boring work, mostly. Most species fought in predictable patterns. The strong crushed the weak. Technology won over courage. Numbers defeated skill. Simple mathematics. But humans were new. Only 50 years since first contact. They had joined the Galactic Council just 15 years ago, and now they were fighting some border war with the Krex Empire. Zektaros had read the files. Humans were primitive by galactic standards. Their ships were small and poorly armed. Their weapons used chemical explosives instead of plasma. They had no shield technology worth mentioning. Their military tactics were basic at best. Why the Council wanted detailed observations of such an obvious outcome puzzled him. The Krex Empire had been expanding for centuries. Their military was disciplined, well-equipped, and experienced. The humans would likely surrender after the first major battle. The war would be over in weeks, maybe days. Still, orders were orders. Zektaros packed his recording equipment and headed for the transport hub. The journey to human space took 3 days. Zektaros spent the time reviewing tactical databases and military history. He studied human society, trying to understand their basic psychology. They seemed chaotic compared to most species. Their governments were messy and argumentative. Their military structure was loose, with too much individual decision-making allowed at lower ranks. They appeared to value something they called initiative over proper discipline. Most concerning was their apparent lack of survival instinct. Human history was full of examples where individuals threw their lives away for abstract concepts like honor or duty. It made no logical sense. Dead individuals could not contribute to species survival. Yet humans seemed to celebrate these wasteful deaths as somehow noble. Zektaros made notes about probable psychological defects in human evolution. It would explain why they were still using primitive technology, while other species had advanced beyond such limitations. The transport dropped him at a human space station called Frontier Base. The station was ugly by Velthari standards. All sharp angles and exposed metal. No artistic design, no pleasing colors. Just function over form, like everything humans built. A human officer met him at the docking bay. The creature was tall and pale, with short brown hair and small, forward-facing eyes. It wore a plain uniform with simple rank markings. Observer Zektaros, I'm Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant. Welcome to Frontier Base. Zektaros nodded politely. I am here to observe the conflict with the Krex Empire. My orders indicate I will be assigned to a vessel called the USS Dakota. That's right. Captain Miller is expecting you. The Dakota is a good ship. She's been in 3 engagements already. They walk through corridors that hum with activity. Humans move quickly, carrying equipment and talking in loud voices. Their behavior seemed undisciplined to Zektaros. In a proper military organization, personnel moved quietly and efficiently. These humans appeared almost casual about their duties. How long do you expect this conflict to continue? Zektaros asked. Lisa Grant's face changed expression. Something flickered in her eyes. Hard to say. The Krex have hit 4 colonies so far. They seem to want the whole sector. Your forces are outnumbered significantly. Logic suggests negotiated surrender would minimize casualties. The human stopped walking and looked at him directly. Observer, with respect, you might not understand how humans think about these things. Zektaros made a mental note about human pride affecting rational decision-making. They reached the docking bay where a human shuttle waited. The craft was small and looked damaged. Scorch marks covered the hull, and one engine housing had been welded back together with visible repair patches. Is this vessel safe for travel? Zektaros asked. Safe enough. Lisa Grant replied with what humans called a smile. Our pilot is good. Ryan Cole can fly anything. The shuttle trip to the USS Dakota took 2 hours. Zektorah spent the time observing the human pilot. Ryan Cole was young, probably barely into adulthood by human standards. He handled the controls with casual confidence, making conversation while navigating through an asteroid field that should have required full attention. First time observing humans in a fight? Ryan asked. Yes, I have documented conflicts involving 47 different species. Cool. You're going to see something different this time, I bet. Zektorah wondered what the human meant by that. The USS Dakota appeared ahead of them, and Zektorah was surprised by how small it was. The ship was barely 300 meters long. Its armor looked thin. The weapon ports were few and small. By Velthari standards, it was hardly a military vessel at all. She doesn't look like much, but she's tough, Ryan said, noticing Zektorah's expression. Captain Miller has kept her fighting when bigger ships have given up. They docked with the Dakota, and Zektorah was led to the bridge. The space was cramped and filled with primitive computer displays. Human crew members worked at various stations, and their behavior confirmed his observations about lack of discipline. They talked freely, made jokes, and showed little formal respect for rank structure. A human approached him. This one was older, with gray hair and lines around his eyes. He wore captain's markings, but carried himself without the rigid posture Zektorah expected from a senior officer. Observer Zektorah, I'm Jake Miller, captain of this ship. Welcome aboard. Thank you, Captain. I am here to document your military operations against the Krex Empire. Good timing. We're heading out in 6 hours to join the fleet at New Haven. The Krex have been hitting the colony, and we're going to make them stop. Zektorah accessed his database quickly. New Haven was a small human settlement with maybe 50,000 inhabitants. The Krex force attacking it numbered over 200 ships with full support systems. The human response fleet had 37 vessels, most smaller than the Dakota. Captain, my analysis indicates your forces are substantially outnumbered, perhaps a strategic withdrawal. Jake Miller's expression changed, becoming harder. Observer, humans don't abandon colonies. We protect our people. Even when protection is logically impossible? Especially then. Zektorah decided this was an example of the psychological defects he had read about. He would document it carefully. A crew member approached the captain. Sir, all ships report ready for departure. Then let's go give the Krex something to think about, Jake Miller said. Zektorah felt the ship begin to move and started his first official recordings. He expected this to be a short assignment. The human fleet moved through space like a collection of metal scraps held together by hope. Zektorah observed from the Dakota's bridge as 37 ships of various sizes arranged themselves in what the humans called a battle formation. To his trained eye, it looked more like organized chaos. Fleet positions confirmed. Reported communications Officer Brad White. All ships ready for jump to New Haven. Captain Jake Miller stood at the center of the bridge, studying tactical displays that showed enemy positions. The data was not encouraging. Krex forces had established a blockade around New Haven with over 200 vessels. Their ships were larger, better armed, and equipped with energy shields that could absorb massive damage. Sir, Lisa Grant approached with a data pad. Latest intelligence from New Haven. The Krex have landed ground forces. Colonial Governor Peterson reports they're demanding complete surrender. Zektorah watched Jake Miller's face carefully. This was the moment when logic should prevail. Any rational military commander would recognize the impossible odds and negotiate terms. The Krex were known for accepting surrender if offered quickly enough. What's our estimated arrival time? Jake Miller asked. 4 hours, sir. Good. That gives Peterson time to organize evacuation points. Send word to the fleet commanders. We're going in fast and loud. Zektorah could not contain his confusion. Captain, forgive my question, but your tactical situation appears hopeless. The enemy has superior numbers, technology, and position. Strategic withdrawal would preserve your forces for better opportunities. Several bridge crew members looked at the Velthari observer. Jake Miller turned to face him directly. Observer, let me explain something about humans. We don't calculate whether we can win before we decide what's right. We decide what's right, then figure out how to win. But mathematics clearly indicates. Mathematics interrupted Chief Engineer Tony Clark from his station, didn't account for human stubbornness. The bridge crew laughed. Zektorah made notes about inappropriate humor during crisis situations. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, and Zektorah used the travel time to study the human crew more carefully. Their behavior continued to puzzle him. They prepared for battle with casual conversation and occasional laughter. Weapons Officer Sandra Hayes cleaned her instruments while humming what humans called music. Navigator Pete Collins shared pictures of his family with other crew members. Most disturbing was their apparent lack of fear. Zektorah could detect stress chemicals in most species, but human biochemistry was different. These individuals showed elevated heart rates and increased alertness, but no signs of terror that should accompany certain death. Dropping from hyperspace in 30 seconds, Pete Collins announced. The tactical displays immediately filled with red contacts. Krek's ships surrounded New Haven in a perfect blockade formation. The human fleet appeared tiny by comparison, like insects approaching a predator. Fleet Admiral Torres to all ships. Came a voice over communications. Remember, people, we're not here to win pretty. We're here to get our people out. Make every shot count. Zektorah quickly accessed Alex Torres in a human military database. The fleet commander was young for such responsibility, but had survived 12 engagements against superior forces. His tactical record showed a disturbing pattern of achieving objectives despite suffering heavy losses. Krek's fleet is hailing us, Brad White reported. Put them through, Jake Miller ordered. A harsh, mechanical voice filled the bridge. Human vessels, you are outnumbered 10-1. Surrender immediately, and you will be permitted to evacuate non-combatants. Alex Torres responded from the flagship. Krek's commander, this is Admiral Torres. We're here to escort our people home. Move your ships out of our way. Admiral, you cannot be serious. Your force is insufficient for this task. Then you shouldn't have any trouble stopping us. The communication ended. Zektorah watched the tactical display as the human fleet began moving toward New Haven. They were not retreating. They were not negotiating. They were attacking. All ships, initiate Plan Delta, Alex Torres commanded. Let's show them how humans dance. Zektorah had studied thousands of battle plans from dozens of species. Plan Delta made no tactical sense. The human ships scattered in different directions instead of concentrating their firepower. Small groups peeled off to attack isolated enemy positions. The main force dove directly toward the strongest Krek's formation. Captain, Zektorah said carefully, this strategy appears to violate several fundamental principles of fleet combat. Jake Miller was watching his displays intently. Observer, human tactics don't always follow the textbook. Sometimes you have to be creative. The first engagement began as a USS Ranger, a small human destroyer, attacked 3 Krek's cruisers simultaneously. Zektorah expected the ship to be destroyed immediately. Instead, it used the asteroid field for cover, forcing the larger Krek's vessels into positions where they interfere with each other's firing solutions. Look at that, Sandra Hayes said admiringly. Captain Barnes is making them dance. On the tactical display, Zektorah watched something that should have been impossible. The single human ship was actually winning. It had disabled 1 Krek's cruiser and damaged another by using superior speed and maneuverability to stay in their blind spots. More impossible things began happening across the battlefield. Human ships worked in pairs and small groups, covering each other's weaknesses and exploiting enemy positioning mistakes. When their weapons failed, they rammed enemy vessels. When their shields collapsed, they used debris fields for protection. The Dakota joined a group of 5 human ships attacking a Krek supply formation. Zektorah watched Jake Miller coordinate with other captains using rapid, informal communication that ignored proper military protocol but achieved perfect timing. Tony, I need everything the engines can give us, Jake Miller called to his chief engineer. You got it, Captain, but I can't promise how long they'll hold together. Long enough is all we need. The Dakota accelerated beyond safe parameters, leading the attack group directly into the Krek's formation. Weapons fire filled the space around them, but Jake Miller kept his ship moving unpredictably, avoiding the worst damage while his gunners targeted enemy weak points. Sandra Hayes managed to disable 2 Krex ships with precisely placed shots that shouldn't have been possible with human targeting systems. When Zektora analyzed the firing solutions later, he realized she had been calculating trajectories in her head, accounting for ship movement and gravitational effects without computer assistance. "How did you make those shots?" he asked. Sandra Hayes looked surprised by the question. "Just felt right, I guess. My dad taught me to shoot when I was young. Same principles, different scale." The engagement continued for 3 hours. By every logical calculation, the human fleet should have been destroyed in the first 30 minutes. Instead, they were actually advancing toward New Haven, clearing paths through the Krex blockade. But the cost was terrible. Zektora watched human ships disappear from the tactical display one by one. The USS Defiant exploded while ramming a Krex battleship. The USS Liberty lost life support but kept fighting until her crew suffocated at their posts. The USS Phoenix suffered engine failure and was overwhelmed by enemy fire. Each loss was acknowledged briefly on communications. Then the remaining ships continued their advance. No one panicked. No one retreated. They just kept fighting. "Breakthrough achieved," Alex Torres announced. "Evacuation ships move in. Cover units. Maintain perimeter." Zektora watched as human transport ships began landing on New Haven while military vessels held off Krex attempts to stop them. The plan was working, despite being logically impossible. "How?" he asked Jake Miller. "How are you achieving this?" The human captain was coordinating with ground forces while monitoring damage reports. "Observer, sometimes you just have to trust your people to do what's right. Humans are good at that." Another impossible human trait. Zektora realized. Individual initiative that somehow created coordinated action without central planning. He had never seen anything like it in 47 other species. The evacuation continued, and Zektora began to understand that his initial assessment had been completely wrong. The battle for New Haven's evacuation should have been over in minutes. Zektora had run the calculations 3 times, and every simulation showed the same result. Complete human defeat within the first quarter hour. Instead, 6 hours later, the impossible was happening. Human ships continued fighting despite damage that should have forced them to retreat. The Dakota had lost primary shields, main communications, and 2 engine sections. Sparks flew from damaged control panels, and the artificial gravity fluctuated with each weapon's impact. Yet Captain Jake Miller continued giving orders as if his ship was in perfect condition. "Tony, how are those engines holding up?" Jake Miller called to his chief engineer. From somewhere deep in the ship came Tony Clark's voice through the backup communication system. "Captain, I'm literally holding the power couplings together with my hands right now. The connections are completely fried. Can you keep us moving? As long as you don't mind me getting cooked by radiation leaks, sure." Zektora stared at his instruments. According to his readings, Chief Engineer Tony Clark was being exposed to lethal levels of energy radiation. Any rational being would abandon that position immediately. Death from radiation exposure was slow and horrible. Should I not order him to evacuate that area? Zektora asked. "Tony's keeping us alive." Sandra Hayes replied from her weapon station. Her targeting computer had failed, so she was manually calculating firing solutions. "If he leaves, we all die anyway." This was another example of the human psychological defect Zektora had been documenting. They seemed incapable of making rational survival decisions when other humans were depending on them. On the main tactical display, the evacuation ships continued lifting off from New Haven. Each transport carried thousands of civilians to safety, but the Krex were adapting to human tactics. Fresh enemy reinforcements had arrived, and they were beginning to overwhelm the human defenders. Admiral Torres to all ships came the fleet commander's voice. "We've got problems." Krex reinforcements just jumped in, 3 battleships and support elements. Zektora quickly analyzed the new tactical situation. The additional Krex forces made human victory mathematically impossible. Even if every human ship fought perfectly, they lacked sufficient firepower to penetrate the enemy formation. "Sir," Lisa Grant reported, "evacuation status shows 60% complete. We need at least 4 more hours." Jake Miller studied his displays silently. Zektora could see the human captain performing his own tactical analysis. The mathematics were clear. Insufficient time, insufficient firepower, insufficient ships. All ships. This is Admiral Torres. We're going to buy more time. All fighter squadrons, prepare for deep strike missions. Zektorah watched in horror as small human fighter craft launched from their carriers. These tiny ships had no chance against Krek's capital vessels. Their weapons could barely damage enemy armor. It was pure suicide. Observer, Jake Miller said quietly, "You might want to pay attention to this. You're about to see something special." The fighter squadrons formed up and accelerated toward the Krek's battleships. Leading the attack was Ryan Cole, the young pilot who had transported Zektorah to the Dakota. His fighter was the same damaged craft they had used, still showing repair patches and scorch marks. "Gold Squadron to all fighters," Ryan Cole's voice crackled over communications. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy these ships. We just need to confuse them long enough for the evacuation to continue." The fighters reached the Krek's formation and immediately scattered in all directions. Instead of attacking in coordinated groups, each pilot began flying independently, using asteroids and debris for cover while making hit-and-run attacks on the enemy ships. Zektorah observed the fighter combat with growing amazement. The human pilots were performing maneuvers that should have been impossible with their primitive technology. They used gravity wells to slingshot around obstacles, timed their attacks to exploit momentary gaps in enemy defenses, and coordinated their efforts without any apparent central command. Ryan Cole's fighter dove directly into the hangar bay of a Krek's battleship. Zektorah expected the small craft to be destroyed instantly by internal defenses. Instead, the tactical display showed explosions throughout the enemy vessel as Ryan somehow disabled their fighter launch systems from inside. "How is that pilot still alive?" Zektorah asked. "Ryan's creative," Sandra Hayes replied, while firing at long-range targets. "He probably found something inside that ship to blow up." Minutes later, Ryan Cole's fighter emerged from the Krek's battleship, which was now listing badly and launching no more enemy fighters. The impossible had happened again, but the human fighters were taking losses. Zektorah watched several small craft disappear from the tactical display as Krek's defensive fire found its targets. Each loss was acknowledged briefly on communications. Then the remaining pilots continued their attacks. "Dakota, this is Gold 7, came a strained voice. "My engine's gone, but I've got weapons. Requesting permission to ram that cruiser." Jake Miller responded immediately. "Negative, Gold 7. Eject and wait for pickup." "Sir, with respect, there won't be time for pickup. That cruiser is heading for the evacuation ships. I can stop it." Zektorah watched another impossible human decision play out in real time. The pilot of Gold 7 was choosing certain death to protect evacuation ships full of civilians he would never meet. "Gold 7, your call," Jake Miller said quietly. The small fighter craft accelerated toward a Krek's cruiser that was indeed moving to intercept evacuation transports. The enemy ship's defensive weapons destroyed the fighter just before impact, but the explosion damaged the cruiser's engines enough to slow its advance. "Target neutralized," reported Sandra Hayes. "Evacuation ships have clear passage." The battle continued with more impossible human actions. When ships lost main weapons, their crews used mining equipment and construction tools to continue fighting. When life support failed, personnel worked in vacuum suits until their air ran out. When communication systems were destroyed, they coordinated attacks using signal lights and emergency beacons. Dr. Janet Pierce, the Dakota's medical officer, had converted the ship's mess hall into an emergency medical facility. She was treating wounded crew members while the ship shook from weapons impacts, performing surgery while debris fell from the ceiling. "Doctor, should you not evacuate the wounded to a safer location?" Zektorah asked during a brief lull in the fighting. "Where exactly would be safer?" Dr. Pierce replied while operating on a crew member who had been injured in an engine room explosion. "Besides, these people got hurt defending the ship. I'm not leaving them." Zektorah made more notes about human psychological abnormalities. Dr. Pierce was risking her life for individuals who might die anyway. It made no logical sense from a species survival perspective. The evacuation neared completion as human ships continued their impossible defense. Zektorah's instruments showed that most human vessels were operating far beyond their design limits. The Dakota's hull was showing stress fractures. Life support was failing on multiple decks. Yet the crew continued working at their posts. Final evacuation ships launching, Lisa Grant reported. All civilians are away. Fleet units. This is Admiral Torres. Mission accomplished. All ships withdraw to Rally Point 7. The human fleet began its retreat, still fighting as they moved away from New Haven. The Krex pursued, but cautiously. They had learned to respect human desperation. As the Dakota jumped to hyperspace, Zektorah reviewed his battle recordings. By every measure of military science, the humans should have been completely destroyed. Instead, they had achieved their objective and evacuated 50,000 civilians. The cost had been enormous. 15 human ships destroyed, thousands of personnel killed or wounded, but they considered it a victory. Captain, Zektorah said as the ship moved through hyperspace, I do not understand your species' approach to warfare. Jake Miller was reading casualty reports, his expression grim. What don't you understand, observer? You achieved your objective, but at terrible cost. A negotiated settlement could have saved many lives. Whose lives? The civilians we evacuated, or our military personnel? Both. Compromise could have preserved more total survivors. Jake Miller looked at him directly. Observer, humans don't compromise about protecting innocent people. That's not a military decision. That's who we are. Zektorah realized he needed to completely revise his understanding of human psychology. These were not defects in their evolution. These were features. 3 days after the evacuation of New Haven, the Krex Empire made their response clear. A massive fleet appeared at the edge of human space, carrying enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. Zektorah studied the intelligence reports from his position aboard the Dakota and felt his throat sacs flutter with something approaching fear. The Krex had sent over 500 ships. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels formed a fleet that represented significant military investment. This was not a border skirmish anymore. This was total war. Fleet briefing in 10 minutes. Jake Miller announced his crew, all senior staff, to the conference room. Zektorah followed the human officers to a small room where tactical displays showed the approaching enemy force. The contrast between human and Krex capabilities was stark. The entire human military in this sector counted barely 100 ships, most smaller and less advanced than their enemies. Admiral Alex Torres appeared on the main screen from his flagship. His face looked tired, but his voice remained steady. People, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The Krex have decided to make an example of us. Intelligence indicates they want to eliminate human presence in this entire sector. Lisa Grant raised her hand. Sir, what about support from the Galactic Council? Council policy prohibits direct military intervention in territorial disputes. We're on our own. Zektorah had expected this response. The Galactic Council preferred to let smaller conflicts resolve themselves naturally. Intervention only occurred when galactic stability was threatened. What are our options? Asked Captain Barnes from a USS Ranger. Alex Torres manipulated the tactical display, showing human defensive positions. We fall back to Fortress Alpha. It's our best fortified position, and we can make them pay for every light year. Fortress Alpha was a military station built inside an asteroid field. It had been designed as a last resort defensive position, with heavy weapons and thick armor. But Zektorah's analysis showed it could not withstand the Krex assault for more than a few days. Sir, Captain Miller spoke up, what about the civilian populations on the outer colonies? Evacuation is already underway. We're pulling everyone back to the core systems. Zektorah watched the human officers process this information. Their entire territory was being abandoned. Homes, businesses, infrastructure built over decades would be destroyed or captured. Yet none of them suggested surrender. The meeting ended with detailed defensive plans that ignored the mathematical reality of the situation. The humans were planning to fight a force 5 times larger, with inferior technology and no hope of victory. 2 days later, the siege of Fortress Alpha began. Zektorah observed from the Dakota's bridge as Krex ships surrounded the human position. The asteroid field provided some protection, but enemy long-range weapons began methodically destroying defensive installations. Fortress Alpha to all ships, came the voice of Colonel Sam Peterson, the station commander. Welcome to our new home. Let's make the Krex regret coming here. The human defensive strategy was unlike anything Zektora had studied. Instead of concentrating their forces for maximum firepower, they spread ships throughout the asteroid field in small groups. Each group could support the others while remaining mobile enough to avoid concentrated enemy attacks. Captain, Sandra Hayes reported, Krex ships are moving into attack formation. Jake Miller studied his tactical display. All right, people, just like we practiced. Make them work for every meter. The Krex assault began with overwhelming firepower concentrated on Fortress Alpha's main guns. Zektora expected the station to be destroyed quickly, but human engineers had prepared surprises. Hidden weapons emerged from asteroids throughout the field. Defensive platforms that appeared to be debris suddenly activated and began firing. More impossibly, human ships began using tactics that violated basic military principles. Single vessels attacked enemy formations that should have destroyed them instantly, but they used the asteroids for cover so effectively that larger Krex ships had trouble targeting them. Ryan Cole, now promoted to squadron leader after surviving the fighter attack on the Krex battleship, led his pilots in strikes that bordered on insanity. They flew between enemy ships, using the Krex vessel's own size against them as larger ships couldn't fire without hitting their allies. Gold Squadron to Dakota, Ryan's voice came over communications. We got 3 enemy destroyers trying to flank the station. Permission to intercept. That's suicide, Ryan. Jake Miller responded. 3 destroyers against 8 fighters? Sir, we've done worse odds than that. Zektora watched the fighter squadron engage 3 ships that each outweighed them by factors of thousands. The human pilots used every trick they had learned. Asteroid cover, coordinated attacks on weak points, and desperate courage that made up for technological disadvantages. 2 fighters were lost, but they disabled 1 destroyer and forced the others to retreat. It should have been impossible. The siege continued for days, and Zektora documented human behavior that continued to challenge his understanding of rational warfare. When ammunition ran low, human ships used mining charges as weapons. When shields failed, they used debris as armor. When weapons overheated, crews performed repairs under fire. Dr. Janet Pierce had established a medical station inside one of the larger asteroids. She was treating wounded from multiple ships while also coordinating medical evacuations under combat conditions. When Krex forces located her position and began targeting it, she refused evacuation. Doctor, you must retreat to a safer location. Zektora insisted during one of his visits to check on wounded crew members. Observer, these people are hurt because they were protecting all of us. I'm not abandoning them for my own safety. She continued working while explosions shook the asteroid around them. Several times, debris collapsed sections of the medical facility, but Dr. Pierce and her staff simply cleared the wreckage and continued treating patients. Chief Engineer Tony Clark had been exposed to dangerous radiation levels during the battle at New Haven, but he refused medical leave. Instead, he moved between human ships throughout the asteroid field, performing emergency repairs that kept damaged vessels fighting. Mr. Clark, your radiation exposure levels are approaching lethal limits. Zektora observed during one repair mission. Observer, a lot of good people are going to die if these ships stop working. I can handle a little radiation poisoning. Tony Clark was clearly in pain from the radiation sickness, but he continued his work. Zektora realized this was another example of humans choosing group survival over individual welfare. The siege intensified as the Krex brought in more specialized weapons. They began systematically destroying asteroids to eliminate human cover. Fortress Alpha's shields were failing under constant bombardment. Colonel Sam Peterson coordinated the defense, while also managing evacuation operations for wounded personnel. His communications revealed the strain of command, but also something Zektora was beginning to recognize as typical human behavior. All ships, this is Fortress Alpha, were taking heavy damage, but evacuation ships are still getting through. Every minute we hold gives more people time to reach safety. The humans were fighting a doomed battle to protect people they might never see again. Citizens of colonies they had already abandoned. Families of soldiers who had died in previous battles. It made no logical sense, but it was completely consistent with human psychology. On the 7th day of the siege, Fortress Alpha's main reactor began failing. The station's weapons went offline one by one. Krek's ships moved closer, preparing for the final assault. All ships, this is Admiral Torres, came the fleet commander's voice. Fortress Alpha is no longer defensible. All personnel, prepare for final evacuation. Zekthera expected relief from a human crew. The impossible defense was finally ending. They could retreat with honor, having delayed the enemy far longer than anyone thought possible. Instead, he watched Jake Miller's expression harden with determination. Dakota to Admiral Torres. Sir, requesting permission to remain and cover the evacuation. Jake, that's a suicide mission. Yes, sir. But someone needs to buy time for the evacuation ships to clear the system. Every ship in the human fleet volunteered for the suicide mission. All of them. Zekthera's instruments detected no deception, no reluctance. They were genuinely willing to die to protect people they had already saved multiple times. This makes no sense, Zekthera said aloud. Lisa Grant looked at him from her station. Observer, it makes perfect sense. It's just not the kind of sense your species uses. The evacuation began, and Zekthera prepared to witness something that would haunt his perfect memory for the rest of his life. Fortress Alpha died slowly, piece by piece, under the relentless Krek's bombardment. Zekthera watched from the Dakota's bridge as the massive station's shields finally collapsed completely. Explosions bloomed across its hull like deadly flowers as enemy weapons found critical systems. The human evacuation fleet struggled to clear the system while 12 volunteer ships, including the Dakota, formed a desperate rear guard. Zekthera had calculated their chances of survival, 0. Yet the human crews continued working at their posts with the same casual efficiency they had shown during routine operations. Fortress Alpha to all ships. Colonel Sam Peterson's voice crackled over damaged communications. Main reactor is going critical. All personnel evacuate immediately. Copy that. Fortress Alpha. Admiral Torres responded from his flagship. All evacuation ships, increase speed to maximum. Rear guard, hold position. Jake Miller turned to his crew. You heard the Admiral. Anyone who wants to transfer to an evacuation ship, now's your chance. No shame in it. Zekthera expected some crew members to accept this offer. Basic survival instinct should override military duty when death was certain, but every single person on the bridge remained at their post. Communications Officer Brad, White, continued monitoring emergency channels. Navigator Pete Collins maintained formation with the other rear guard ships. Sandra Hayes prepared weapons for the final battle. Sir, Lisa Grant reported, all evacuation ships report ready for final burn. They need 15 more minutes to reach minimum safe distance. 15 minutes. Zekthera checked the tactical display. Krek's forces were already moving to intercept the fleeing evacuation ships. The rear guard would have to hold off 500 enemy vessels for 15 minutes with 12 damaged ships. It was mathematically impossible. Yet the humans prepared for battle as if they expected to succeed. All ships, this is Admiral Torres. It's been an honor serving with you all. Let's give them hell. The Krek's assault came from all directions simultaneously. Hundreds of ships converged on the tiny human formation, weapons blazing. The space around the Dakota filled with energy beams and missile explosions. Chief Engineer Tony Clark's voice came over the internal communication system. Captain, I'm pushing the engines beyond all safety limits. We'll get 15 minutes, but the ship won't survive much longer than that. Do it, Tony. Zekthera felt the Dakota accelerate beyond what her damaged systems should have been capable of. Throughout the ship, he could hear the sounds of metal stress and failing equipment. Yet Tony Clark kept the engines running through sheer determination and technical skill that bordered on the supernatural. On the tactical display, human ships began disappearing. The USS Ranger exploded while ramming a Krek's cruiser. The USS Phoenix lost life support but continued firing until her crew suffocated at their posts. The USS Liberty's engines failed, and she was overwhelmed by enemy fire while using her final shots to protect other rear guard vessels. Each loss was acknowledged briefly. Then the remaining ships adjusted their formation and continued fighting. Dr. Janet Pierce had remained aboard the Dakota to treat wounded from the rear guard action. She worked in the medical bay while the ship shook from weapons impacts, performing surgery on crew members who had been injured, keeping the ship operational. Dr. Zektorov found her during a brief lull in the fighting. The evacuation ships have medical facilities. You could transfer there safely. Observer, these people are dying to give everyone else 15 minutes. I'm not leaving them to die alone. She returned to her work while explosions echoed through the ship's hull. Another example of humans choosing solidarity over survival. With 8 minutes remaining, the Dakota lost main weapons. Sandra Hayes reported the damage with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the war. Captain, primary guns are offline. Secondary batteries are operating at 30% efficiency. Then we use what we have, Jake Miller replied, ramming speed. Zektorov stared at the human captain in horror. Captain, surely you do not intend to. Observer, sometimes you run out of options. Sometimes you just do what needs to be done. The Dakota accelerated toward the nearest Krex battleship. Enemy defensive fire concentrated on the small human vessel, tearing away armor and destroying secondary systems. But Tony Clark kept the engines running, and Pete Collins maintained course despite damage that should have made navigation impossible. At the last moment, Jake Miller ordered emergency power to the forward shields. The Dakota struck the Krex battleship's weapon ports, causing massive explosions that disabled the enemy vessel's main guns. The human ship survived the impact, barely, but was now completely defenseless. Sir, Brad White reported, evacuation ships have reached minimum safe distance. They're jumping to hyperspace now. All rear guard vessels. Admiral Torres commanded. Mission accomplished. All ships withdraw if able. Of the 12 ships that had volunteered for the suicide mission, only 4 remain operational. The Dakota was one of them, held together by emergency repairs and stubborn human will. But they had succeeded. Every evacuation ship had escaped safely. As the surviving rear guard ships limped toward the jump point, Krex forces moved to intercept them. Fresh enemy squadrons blocked their escape route. The humans had won their battle, but they were still trapped. This is Admiral Torres to Krex Fleet Commander. We have completed evacuation of our personnel. Our forces will surrender if you guarantee safe treatment of survivors. The Krex response was immediate. Human Admiral, your surrender is not required. Complete destruction of all human vessels is ordered. Zektorov felt something he had never experienced before, genuine terror at the behavior of another species. The Krex were violating basic galactic warfare conventions by refusing surrender. This was not military victory. It was extermination. But the human response was even more disturbing. Instead of panic or despair, Jake Miller's voice carried grim satisfaction. Well, that settles it. All ships. We're not surrendering to these monsters. If they want extermination, let's make sure they remember the cost. The 4 remaining human ships turned away from the jump point and accelerated back toward the Krex fleet. They were choosing to fight to the death rather than accept execution. Ryan Cole's fighter squadron, operating from the damaged carrier USS Valiant, launched one final attack. Their small craft dove into the Krex formation, targeting command ships with desperate precision. Ryan himself managed to disable a Krex flagship's bridge before his fighter was destroyed by defensive fire. The Dakota, USS Valiant, USS Defiance, and USS Courage fought their final battle surrounded by hundreds of enemy ships. They had no chance of victory, no hope of survival, no possibility of rescue. They fought anyway. Zektorov watched Tony Clark manually hold power couplings together while radiation poisoning slowly killed him. He observed Dr. Pierce treating wounded while the medical bay filled with smoke from electrical fires. He documented Sandra Hayes calculating targeting solutions by hand when her computers failed. Most significantly, he recorded Jake Miller's final command decision. When the Dakota's life support began failing, the captain ordered all remaining crew to the escape pods. Sir, Lisa Grant protested, someone needs to pilot the ship for the final attack run. That would be me, Jake Miller replied calmly. Everyone else, abandon ship. That's an order. The crew refused to obey. Every single person remained at their post, choosing to die together rather than abandon their captain and their duty. Fortress Alpha exploded in a brilliant flash that briefly outshone the system's star. The Krex fleet claimed total victory, having eliminated organized human resistance in the sector. But Zektorah had witnessed something that would change his understanding of warfare, psychology, and what it meant to be a sentient species. The humans had not simply been defeated. They had demonstrated something that no other species in galactic history had ever shown: the ability to choose collective death over individual survival, not from despair or religious fanaticism, but from simple determination to protect others. As the Dakota's hull began to crack from accumulated damage, Zektorah prepared to die alongside the humans he had come to observe. He had learned far more than he ever intended. Zektorah awakened in darkness, his head throbbing with pain he had never experienced before. His perfect Velthari memory took a moment to process what had happened. The Dakota had been dying, surrounded by hundreds of Krex ships. The final battle should have ended in complete destruction. Instead, he was alive, lying on a hard metal surface in what appeared to be a prison cell. "Observer? You're awake. Good." The voice belonged to Jake Miller. Zektorah turned his head and saw the human captain sitting against the wall nearby. Miller's uniform was torn and bloodstained, but he appeared alert and uninjured. "Captain, I do not understand. How are we alive?" The Krex decided they wanted prisoners for interrogation. They disabled our ships instead of destroying them completely. About 40 of us survived. Zektorah's analytical mind began processing this information. The Krex had violated their own stated intention to completely destroy human forces. Taking prisoners was inefficient if extermination was the goal. Where the other survivors? Scattered throughout the ship in different holding areas. The Krex don't want us communicating with each other. Over the following hours, Zektorah learned more about their situation. The Krex prison ship held survivors from all 4 rear guard vessels. Dr. Janet Pierce was treating wounded prisoners in a makeshift medical facility. Chief Engineer Tony Clark, despite his radiation poisoning, was analyzing the ship's systems from his cell. Communications Officer Brad White had somehow managed to establish contact between different prisoner groups using the ship's internal systems. What disturbed Zektorah most was that the humans continued behaving as if they were still fighting the war. "Captain," he observed during their second day of imprisonment, "your crew continues to act as a military unit, but you have been defeated and captured. Logic suggests accepting the situation and focusing on survival." Jake Miller looked at him with an expression Zektorah was learning to recognize as typical human stubbornness. "Observer, being captured doesn't mean we stop being who we are. We're still military personnel. We still have duties." "What duties can you possibly have as prisoners?" Before Jake Miller could answer, the cell door opened. Krex guards in full armor escorted the prisoners to an interrogation chamber where a tall, insectoid figure waited behind a metal desk. "I am Commander Thekkar," the creature announced in mechanical tones. "You will provide complete tactical information about human military capabilities." Jake Miller straightened to attention. "Captain Jake Miller, Human Colonial Fleet, serial number 7749 Delta. That's all you get." The interrogation continued for hours. Commander Thekkar used various methods to extract information: threats, promises of better treatment, logical arguments about the futility of resistance. Jake Miller gave only his name, rank, and serial number. When the Krex commander turned to Zektorah, the situation became more complex. "You are not human. You are a Galactic Council observer. Your species has no stake in this conflict. Provide tactical analysis of human capabilities, and you will be released unharmed." Zektorah considered the offer carefully. He was indeed a neutral observer. His mission was to document military operations, not participate in them. Providing factual analysis of human tactics would not violate any Galactic Council regulations. But as he looked at Jake Miller, who had protected him throughout the battle despite having no obligation to do so, Zektorah made a decision that surprised him. "I am Observer Zektorah, Velthari Council of Military Analysis, identification code Zeta-79. That is all I am required to provide." Commander Thekkar's mandibles clicked with what might have been irritation. "Observer, you are making an illogical choice. These humans are defeated. Their resistance is meaningless. Help us understand their psychology, and you can return to your normal duties." I declined. The interrogations continued daily, but no prisoner provided useful information. More disturbing for Zektorah was what he observed between interrogation sessions. The human prisoners had organized themselves into a functioning unit despite being scattered throughout the ship. Dr. Pierce coordinated medical care for wounded prisoners across multiple cell blocks. Tony Clark analyzed ship systems and shared intelligence about possible escape routes. Brad White maintained communications between prisoner groups using jury-rigged equipment made from salvaged components. "How are you accomplishing this coordination?" Zektorah asked Jake Miller. "Same way we always have. Everyone does their job, looks out for each other, and trusts the team. But there was no command structure. The Kreks had deliberately separated senior officers from their subordinates. Yet the humans continued functioning as a coordinated unit through informal networks and individual initiative. Most puzzling was their attitude toward their situation. Zektorah detected no despair, no acceptance of defeat. If anything, the prisoners seemed to be planning something. His suspicions were confirmed on the 5th day when Lisa Grant, who had been held in a different section, was brought to their cell block. She had been beaten during interrogation, but remained defiant. "Jake," she whispered when the guards left, "Tony found something. The ship's waste disposal system connects to the main computer core. Brad thinks we can access their navigation systems." "For what purpose?" Jake Miller asked. "The Kreks are using this ship to transport prisoners to a processing facility. But if we can change course, we might be able to reach the neutral zone." Zektorah stared at them in disbelief. "You are planning to escape from inside a heavily guarded Kreks warship with no weapons, no tools, and no knowledge of the ship's layout?" "Observer," Lisa Grant replied. "That's exactly what we're planning." Over the following days, Zektorah watched the impossible plan take shape. Human prisoners throughout the ship worked together despite being unable to meet or communicate openly. Each person contributed their expertise. Tony Clark's engineering knowledge, Dr. Pierce's understanding of alien biology, Brad White's communication skills, Sandra Hayes' tactical thinking. They had no blueprint for Krek ship design, so they created one by having different prisoners observe and memorize details during their movements through the ship. They had no weapons, so they improvised tools from components of their prison cells. They had no unified command structure, so they coordinated through a distributed network that relied on each individual understanding the overall plan. "This is not how escape plans work," Zektorah protested to Jake Miller. "Successful escapes require detailed preparation, complete intelligence, and unified leadership. Your approach violates basic principles of covert operations." "Observer, human approaches don't always follow the textbook. Sometimes you have to trust people to figure things out as they go." The escape attempt began on the 7th day of imprisonment. Zektorah found himself swept along by events that unfolded with remarkable coordination despite the lack of central planning. Tony Clark had indeed found access to the ship's computer systems through the waste disposal network. Brad White had established communication with prisoner groups throughout the ship. Dr. Pierce had developed a method for temporarily disabling Kreks guards using improvised chemical weapons created from medical supplies. But what impressed Zektorah most was how individual prisoners made independent decisions that supported the overall plan without being ordered to do so. When guards discovered computer intrusion, a prisoner named Carl Johnson created a distraction by starting a fight in the mess hall. When security systems began locking down prisoner areas, Amy Rodriguez disabled door controls using techniques she had learned as a civilian engineer. The escape succeeded not because of superior planning or technology, but because 40 humans had decided to trust each other completely. As the prisoner transport changed course toward the neutral zone, Zektorah realized he had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic military history, a successful rebellion organized entirely through individual initiative and mutual cooperation. "Captain," he asked Jake Miller as they watched Krek ships pursuing them through the tactical display they gained access to, "how did you know this would work?" "Observer, I didn't know. None of us knew, but we knew we had to try." "Why?" "You could have served your prison terms and eventually been released. This escape attempt risked everyone's lives." Jake Miller looked at him with the expression Zektaron now understood indicated a fundamental difference in human psychology. Because that's what humans do. We don't accept defeat. We don't give up on each other. And we don't let anyone tell us who we're supposed to be. The stolen Krex transport ship limped through space toward the neutral zone, pursued by a fleet of enemy vessels that grew larger by the hour. Zektaron monitored their situation from a jury-rigged command center that the human prisoners had established in what used to be a cargo bay. Their escape had succeeded beyond all logical probability, but their ultimate survival remained mathematically impossible. The transport ship was damaged, slow, and designed for cargo rather than combat. The pursuing Krex fleet included fast cruisers that would intercept them well before they reached safety. How long until the Krex catch us? Jake Miller asked Tony Clark, who had somehow managed to interface human portable computers with the alien ship systems. At current speed, maybe 8 hours, Tony replied. His radiation sickness was getting worse, but he continued working at his improvised engineering station. I might be able to squeeze a little more speed out of the engines, but not enough to outrun those cruisers. Dr. Janet Pierce approached from her medical station, where she was still treating wounded prisoners with supplies salvaged from the ship's emergency systems. Jake, we need to discuss something. Half our people are in no condition for another fight. If the Krex catch us, they won't. Lisa Grant interrupted from the communication station. Brad's been monitoring emergency frequencies. There's something out there. Communications Officer Brad White looked up from his equipment with an expression of amazement. Captain, I'm picking up human signal patterns. Multiple ships, running silent about 2 light hours from our position. Zektaron accessed the tactical display. Officer White, that is impossible. All human military forces in this sector were destroyed at Fortress Alpha. No rescue fleet could have survived. Observer, Brad White replied. These aren't military signals. These are civilian patterns. Merchant ships, mining vessels, personal craft. Jake Miller studied the display thoughtfully. Civilians? How many? Sir, I count at least 30 vessels. Maybe more. They're maintaining communication silence, but I can detect their engine signatures. The situation made no logical sense to Zektaron. Civilian ships had no military capability. They posed no threat to Krex forces and had no ability to mount a rescue operation. Why would they be here? His question was answered 2 hours later, when the civilian fleet revealed itself. Unknown Krex vessels. This is Captain Jenny Stone of the mining ship Prosperity. You are pursuing a vessel containing human prisoners. Withdraw immediately. Zektaron watched the tactical display as dozens of civilian ships emerged from sensor shadows throughout the system. Mining vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners, private yachts, and even small personal craft. None were designed for combat, but all were moving to intercept the Krex pursuit fleet. The Krex response was predictable. Human civilian vessels, withdraw immediately or be destroyed. You have no military capability to threaten this fleet. Captain Jenny Stone's reply revealed something about human psychology that shocked even Zektaron's analytical mind. Krex Commander, we're not here to threaten you. We're here to get our people back. Last chance to withdraw. The civilian fleet attacked the Krex pursuit force. Zektaron watched in amazement as mining ships used industrial equipment as weapons. Cargo haulers rammed enemy vessels while passenger liners provided covering fire with improvised gun mounts. Personal spacecraft, some barely larger than fighter craft, coordinated attacks on enemy weak points with precision that suggested military training. Captain, Zektaron asked Jake Miller, how are civilian vessels achieving success against military ships? Observer, you're thinking about this wrong. Those aren't civilian vessels anymore. They're human vessels, crewed by people who decided their fellow humans needed help. The battle was chaotic, but effective. The Krex had superior individual ships, but they were outnumbered in facing opponents who fought with desperate creativity. A mining ship called Heavy Load used its ore processing equipment to literally disintegrate a Krex cruiser. The passenger liner New Hope deployed its emergency evacuation pods as improvised missiles. Most remarkably, the civilian fleet was coordinating their attacks through the same kind of distributed command structure Zektaron had observed among the prisoners. No single leader gave orders, but every ship seemed to understand the overall plan. How did they know we were here? Lisa Grant asked. Brad White answered while monitoring communications. I'm intercepting their command frequencies. Apparently, word about Fortress Alpha reached the civilian population. These ships came from all over human space. Merchants, miners, colonists, even some tourists. They organized themselves into a rescue fleet. Organized by whom? No one. Everyone. They just decided to come. The civilian rescue fleet succeeded in driving off most of the Krek's pursuit force, but at terrible cost. Zektorah watched civilian ships disappear from a tactical display as they were destroyed by enemy fire. The mining vessel Prosperity, commanded by Captain Jenny Stone, exploded while ramming a Krek's battleship. The cargo hauler Good Fortune lost life support, but continued fighting until her crew suffocated. Each loss was acknowledged briefly on communications. Then the remaining ships continued their rescue mission. Transport vessel, this is the liner Star Traveler. We're coming alongside for prisoner transfer. Prepare for emergency evacuation. The evacuation proceeded under fire as Krek's reinforcements arrived. Civilian ships docked with the transport vessel and began transferring the freed prisoners, while other vessels provided defensive screens. Zektorah found himself aboard the Star Traveler, a luxury passenger ship that had been hastily converted for rescue operations. The crew was a mixture of professional spacers and volunteers who had never served on a ship before. Welcome aboard, said a young human woman who introduced herself as Lisa Chong, the ship's medical officer. We've got medical facilities set up for the wounded. Are you injured? I am physically undamaged, Zektorah replied, though he was beginning to realize his psychological state was something else entirely. As the evacuation continued, he observed the rescue fleet's personnel more closely. These were not military professionals. They were ordinary citizens who had abandoned their normal lives to mount a rescue mission for people they had never met. Carl Johnson, an engineer who had disabled the transport ship security systems during the escape, was reunited with his brother Dave Johnson, who commanded a mining vessel in the rescue fleet. Neither had known the other was involved in the operation. How did you know I was captured? Carl asked. I didn't, Dave replied. I just knew humans were being held prisoner, and I couldn't stand the thought of leaving them there. Dr. Janet Pierce met with Lisa Chong to coordinate medical care for the wounded. Dr. Pierce had been treating prisoners with improvised supplies for weeks. Lisa Chong had converted a passenger liner into a hospital ship using her own resources. Why did you do this? Dr. Pierce asked. You could have been killed. You could have lost your ship, your career, everything. Lisa Chong looked surprised by the question. Because people needed help. That's what we do. The rescue fleet made a fighting withdrawal toward the neutral zone, while Krek's reinforcements continued to arrive. Several more civilian ships were lost, but the majority of the freed prisoners reached safety. As they crossed into neutral space, Zektorah realized he had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history, an entire civilian population mobilizing spontaneously to rescue their military personnel, not because they were ordered to, not because it was profitable, but because they believed it was right. Captain Miller, Zektorah said as they watched the rescue fleet disperse back to their normal lives, I need to understand something. These civilians risked everything to save people they had never met. They had no military training, no combat experience, no reasonable chance of success. Why did they attempt this rescue? Jake Miller looked at him with the patient expression Zektorah had come to associate with humans trying to explain their psychology to aliens. Observer, you're still thinking like a Velthari. You're analyzing individual risk versus individual benefit. But humans don't work that way. We're part of something larger than ourselves. What do you mean? We're human. All of us. When humans are in trouble, other humans help. It's not a military regulation or a government policy. It's just who we are. As the Star Traveler headed toward human space, Zektorah began to understand that his mission to observe human military capabilities had revealed something much more significant. A species that had evolved beyond individual survival instinct to embrace collective responsibility. The implications terrified him. If humans could inspire ordinary civilians to mount military rescue operations, if they could coordinate complex operations without central authority, if they could choose group welfare over individual survival as a matter of routine psychology, then they represented something unprecedented in galactic civilization. They represented evolution in action, and Zektorah was no longer sure whether other species were ready for what humanity might become. Zektorah sat in his assigned quarters at Galactic Council headquarters, staring at the blank report template on his computer screen. 3 weeks had passed since his rescue from Krek's imprisonment. 3 weeks since he had witnessed the impossible civilian rescue operation. 3 weeks since he had seen things that challenged everything he understood about sentient psychology and military science. The cursor blinked on the empty page, waiting for his analysis. Around him, the familiar environment of the council complex should have been comforting. The rational architecture, the orderly corridors, the quiet efficiency of bureaucratic routine. Everything designed to promote logical thought and analytical precision. But Zektorah found no comfort in these surroundings. His perfect Velthari memory would not let him forget what he had seen. Captain Jake Miller choosing to stay with his dying ship while ordering his crew to safety. Chief Engineer Tony Clark holding power couplings together with his bare hands while radiation slowly killed him. Dr. Janet Pierce operating on wounded soldiers while explosions shook the ship around her. Communications Officer Brad White maintaining emergency channels until the station burst into flames. The individual acts of impossible courage should have been statistical anomalies. But Zektorah had documented hundreds of similar behaviors across dozens of human personnel. This was not aberrant psychology. This was normal human behavior under stress. He tried to write the opening summary. Human military capabilities are limited by primitive technology and small fleet size. But the words felt meaningless. The humans had achieved objectives that superior forces could not accomplish. They had held positions that should have been overrun in minutes. They had mounted rescue operations that violated every principle of military probability. More disturbing were the recordings he had made of human civilian behavior. The rescue fleet organized by ordinary citizens. Mining ship crews using industrial equipment as weapons. Passenger liner personnel converting luxury facilities into military hospitals. Personal spacecraft pilots coordinating attacks with the precision of trained fighter squadrons. None of this fit into standard Galactic Council categories for military analysis. Zektorah deleted his opening paragraph and tried again. Humans demonstrate unconventional tactical approaches, but that missed the central point entirely. Human tactics were not unconventional. They were based on psychological principles that other species did not possess. His door chimed, and Zektorah looked up to see Senior Analyst Mordak enter the room. The elderly Velthari carried himself with the authority of someone who had spent decades analyzing military conflicts throughout the galaxy. Observer Zektorah, your report is overdue. The Council requires immediate tactical assessment of human military capabilities. Senior Analyst, I am experiencing difficulty with the analysis. Mordak's throat sacs fluttered with impatience. The assignment was straightforward. Document human military operations, analyze their effectiveness, provide strategic recommendations. Standard protocol. The humans do not conform to standard protocol. Explain. Zektorah gestured toward his computer screen. How do I categorize a species that chooses collective death over individual survival? How do I analyze military tactics based on individual initiative rather than central command? How do I evaluate a civilization where ordinary citizens spontaneously organize rescue missions for people they have never met? Mordak studied him carefully. Observer, you have been under considerable stress. Extended exposure to primitive species can cause analytical confusion. Perhaps you should request medical evaluation. Senior Analyst, I have perfect memory recall. I can replay every moment of human behavior I observed. This is not confusion. This is documentation psychology that challenges our understanding of sentient evolution. Then provide that documentation. The Council requires facts, not philosophical speculation. After Mordak left, Zektorah attempted to write a factual summary of events. The siege of Fortress Alpha, the evacuation of New Haven, the prisoner rescue operation. But every factual account led to the same impossible conclusion. Humans achieve military objectives through methods that should not work. He tried focusing on tactical analysis. Human ships use inferior technology, but compensate through superior coordination. But that was not accurate either. Human coordination was not superior. It was completely different. They achieved unity of action without unity of command through psychological mechanisms that other species did not possess. Days passed. Zektora's report remained unwritten. Other analysts began asking questions. His supervisor scheduled meetings about delayed deliverables. The Council Administration Office sent formal reminders about bureaucratic deadlines. Finally, Zektora made a decision that surprised him. He began writing the truth. Council Military Analysis Division. Strategic Assessment Report. Observer. Zektora, Veltheri Council of Military Analysis. Subject. Human military capabilities. Classification. Immediate council review required. Summary. The human species represents a fundamental challenge to existing models of military psychology and strategic planning. Standard analytical categories are insufficient for evaluating their capabilities. Detailed analysis. Humans possess technological capabilities approximately equivalent to level 3 civilizations on the galactic development scale. Their fleet assets are numerically inferior to most spacefaring species. Their individual ship designs prioritize function over advanced systems. By conventional measures, they should represent minimal military threat to established powers. However, conventional measures do not account for human psychological characteristics that fundamentally alter their military effectiveness. First, humans demonstrate consistent willingness to sacrifice individual survival for group objectives. This is not limited to military personnel under formal discipline, but extends to civilian populations who voluntarily undertake dangerous missions for abstract principles. Second, humans achieve coordination through distributed decision-making systems that do not require central authority. Individual initiative creates collective action patterns that are more flexible and resilient than traditional command structures. Third, humans treat failure as temporary rather than final. Defeated units continue resistance. Captured personnel organize escape attempts. Civilian populations mobilize rescue operations. They do not accept defeat as a permanent condition. These characteristics combine to create military effectiveness that cannot be calculated using standard models. Strategic recommendations. The human species should be classified as a Category 1 strategic, concerned despite their technological limitations. Their psychological evolution represents something unprecedented in galactic history. They have developed social mechanisms that allow individual sacrifice for collective benefit to occur routinely rather than exceptionally. If humans continue their current expansion into galactic civilization, other species will face populations that coordinate more effectively, fight more persistently, and support each other more completely than any previously documented sentient group. This is not a military assessment. This is an evolutionary assessment. Humans represent what intelligent species might become if they transcend individual survival programming while retaining the benefits of advanced technology and social organization. Final conclusion. Immediate full alliance status should be extended to humanity, not because they are currently powerful, but because they demonstrate psychological capabilities that could reshape galactic civilization, and because if they ever determine that other species represent threats to human welfare, their technological disadvantages will be temporary, while their psychological advantages appear permanent. Additional note. I am submitting a request for transfer from military observation duties. Some things once witnessed cannot be approached with analytical detachment. Human psychology has implications that extend beyond military science into questions about the future of intelligent life in the galaxy. Zektora completed his report and submitted it to the Council database. Within hours, he received a response requesting immediate appearance before the Senior Council for detailed briefing. As he prepared for the meeting, Zektora realized that his mission to observe humans had changed him as much as it had informed him. He could no longer approach sentient psychology with pure analytical objectivity. He had seen what humans could become, and it terrified and inspired him in equal measure. The perfect Veltheri memory that had made him ideal for military observation now meant he would never forget Captain Jake Miller's final command. Everyone else, abandon ship. That's an order that his entire crew had refused to obey. choose and die together rather than abandon their captain and their duty. Some images, once recorded in perfect memory, change how you understood everything else. Zektorod gathered his materials and headed for the council chambers, knowing that his report would either change galactic policy or end his career. Either way, the galaxy needed to understand what humanity represented before it was too late to adapt. The humans were coming, and they brought with them a form of evolution that made superior technology irrelevant. That was a report he had finally been able to write.